be accomplished with a computer. So solutions that a computer can execute, that's what computational thinking is designed to create, those types of solutions. But you don't have to have a computer present to learn the practices, the ways of thinking that are required. And we're going to be looking at some unplugged activities, some ways to teach students or youth about computational thinking when you don't actually have a computer in front of you, because sometimes it's easier actually to separate the process from a computer to actually talk about the steps. And we're going to start our discussion today with a challenge. And the first challenge for me is sharing a whiteboard. It's not something I use a lot in Zoom, but we're going to use the whiteboard today. And okay, I think I am ready. Here's the challenge that I have for you. What is the sum of the numbers, specifically the integers, from 1 to 200?
Sandra, you're not sharing your whiteboard if you were planning to.
It looks like I am. Let me figure out what I'm doing here. You know, it is not working. All right, let's start again. Oh, Kim was seeing it. I'm having trouble with it. So we're gonna do it verbally. The sum of integers from 1 to 200. Give you a minute to think about that, and then you can share your answer. You're supposed to do it in your head. I didn't say that clearly. What do you think? Has anybody got a solution? I'm going to invite you to turn your microphones on, and if you have a solution, you can share it. If you think that that was a ridiculous problem to try to solve in your head, you can share that too. How far did you get? So sometimes when you get a problem like this, maybe you reach for a piece of paper and you start thinking about how to solve it. I wanted you specifically to do it in your head. And that probably led to the response that that's too big, too complex to do in my head. And we don't even try to solve it. You're just waiting to see if somebody else comes up with the right answer. And that's what happens, especially to kids when they get stuck. Oh, Rebecca, you're close. With a problem that's too big for them to know how to start it, where to come from. And there is a trick, Kim, you're right. There's a process. And the first one is to think about, all right, I'm not sure what the sum of all the numbers are, but can I make it simpler? And how about this one, 200 plus 1? Anybody know the answer to that? Okay, 201. Here's another one. I think we're starting to see a pattern here. If we break this down into a series of pairs between 1 and 200 that add up to 201, that's something we can do in our head. And does anybody have a guess on how many pairs there would be? This is the last one if we keep going on it. That's right, there's 100. So if we think about if the sum of 200 or of two pairs equal 201, that happens 100 times. There we go. Kim's already got the answer. And again, we can turn that into a problem that we can do, and we can even do in our head. So now we have an answer to this problem. And we did that by breaking it down into just smaller problems that were easier to do in your head. What if I ask you the problem in a more general sense? That what would it be if I wanted to do 1 to 2,000? If I pose that as a general problem, can we come up with a general solution? Oh, I think I just put the general solution and I copied the wrong thing. If we do that as an example, even with 1 to 2,000, it's something you can kind of wrap your head around, because 2,000 plus 1 is 2001, and you've got that same process. So taking that as a general solution, more like a math problem, the sum of numbers between x and any number would be x divided by 2 times x plus 1. And that is what we would call in computational thinking an algorithm, a general rule that we can follow. And I'm using this as an example to introduce what we're going to be talking about today, which is these computational thinking practices. And to go with that, there's 4 new terms that we're going to be using. And those are what I have up here on the screen: decompose, pattern matching, abstraction, and algorithm. And we can think about this in terms of the activity that we just did. We started out using decomposition to break the problem down into smaller bits, like 200 plus 1, that are easier to manage. And then we saw that there was a pattern, that's pattern matching, to find that there's 100 pairs in that sum. And we can then use abstraction, kind of thinking about how do we pull that specific solution into a general solution to create an algorithm or a rule that we can follow, a list of steps that can be used to create a more generalized solution. And that's what we're going to be talking about today, these computational thinking practices. Any questions about that, or anybody want to add something to that before we jump into the next step? All right, Anne, I'm going to let you go next.
All right, now we're going to play a game with no instructions, and this is an activity from code.org, as was the previous one. And this is where you will need your handouts that you hopefully printed, and either your crayons or markers, and your dice. So does everyone have what you need? If you don't, let me know. And Jaden suggested using a number randomizer. You can just write 6 numbers on a piece of paper and draw them out of a hat. It doesn't matter. So in just a few minutes, we'll go into breakout rooms of 3 people in each room to figure out how to play the game using the worksheet. And it will be up to the 3 of you in the room to try and figure out what are the actual instructions to play this game. And you do that by reading the user experience that Sandra has up on the slide. That is your first worksheet in the handouts. Get an idea of how others have played the game. And then you think about how you can use the computational thinking practices to figure out how the game works. And so we're going to give you 7 minutes to try and figure this out. And then if you get done with that and you have time, you can play a couple rounds of this to just kind of see how it works. And you can use the second 2 sheets are the rest of the game. So you use those to help you figure this out. So if you need any help, once we put you in the breakout rooms, just click the Ask for Help button in the meeting controls and invite host. And either Sandra or I will come in and answer questions. And if you finish early, you can return to this main session. And that helps me know when everybody's ready. We'll just move on if you get done in less than 7 minutes. So if there are no questions, Sandra will go ahead and send you to your breakout rooms. You're muted, Sandra.
Can you give me a thumbs up if you're ready?
Looks like everybody's ready.
You should be going automatically to your breakout rooms. Kimberly, you should have an invitation to join a breakout room. We've got one breakout room with only 2 people in it.
Yep.
But Kim is in there and I'm sure she can handle it.
Is there a way to send a message just to that room to tell them they'll just have 2? They can probably figure it out.
Yeah, I think I can. Oh, there's another room with just 2. And again, Rebecca's in there, so there's somebody experienced. Welcome back. Six seconds and they'll all be back. All right. I think we got everybody back.
All right. So hopefully that gave you enough time to figure out how to play the game. So how did your group figure out how to play this game? You can either type in the chat if you want to, or if one person from your group wants to unmute and talk about it, that would be great too.
It was nice having the kind of examples at the beginning of each of the player actually going through it. So we see the first option for your animal, it's a choice. The next 3 are dependent on what you roll. And then we could see what number corresponds with each of those variables for those next 3.
Okay. Very good.
As with my group, I am sorry, I don't remember the names in the group, but what we try to do first is to look through the instructions here where the game is concerned and to kind of see what is it that was expected, what is it that we need, and then we realize that we need a die, of course, and each player would have their turn, but then we also realize that this is where we probably were not sure if player one, for example, who needing to throw a 6, then a 4, then a 2, if it did not go that way, then the next player would get the chance to probably roll the die, and it probably would come right back around until the the other players getting a chance to roll the die. And then the activity that the thing that was supposed to be carried out by each player, we made ourselves clear on that. And so the end instruction there was that we were supposed to create, I would say maybe a game board or something like that. So it would have been, we decided it would have been a pin board with these pictures of each of these different animals would have been pinned on it. And that's how we would carry it out. So we didn't actually get a chance to play the game, but we went through it to have an understanding of how that game would have been.
I think that is a really interesting way of thinking about it, because there's more than one solution to it, and you could set up something with a game board, you could set up something else. So I think that was really a creative way of breaking down this problem. Does anybody else want to share?
In our group, we also kind of use the context clues from the descriptions to get a good idea that we had the opportunity to choose an animal, but then the different numbers on the dice did correspond with certain things. But yeah, we also really like the idea that it was something that was not super structured, which allowed that creativity as to what does this look like? Do we create a board? Do we draw a picture of the animal each time and draw the different things onto it? Do we know what the colors or objects are and have those drawn, then cut out so we can place them on the animal? So there were a lot of different ways of finding a way to play the game and different ways of what it's going to look like in the end, but still using the basic outline of this number equals this color or this object and the placement on the animal's body.
I think that's a really good thing to note, because for some students, this is going to be fun because it's computational thinking and that's their strength. But for other students that are maybe very much more artistic, you still have an element of being able to put that in here and to give the students the choice of which animal they're going to choose. And so, yes, there are still some elements of being able to be creative in a different way, but still do computational thinking. So I think those are all really interesting responses and all different ways of solving this. So
And it looks like Tracy wants to share something.
go ahead, Tracy.
Yeah, my group, we kind of talked about doing this in reverse. Like it's fun for the kids who think about, oh, I'm going to put, a blue cupcake on the belly of the whatever, I don't know, mix it up basically. And then kids have to roll the dice until they get all those parts, and you kind of build the animal as you go. And the other one I was thinking about was, well, could you give the kids, all right, you have to get to 14. What's the roll of the dice until somebody keeps adding up their 3 rolls? Do they get to 14? And then when you get there, you can build that animal based on the 3 different rolls of the dice. You know what I mean? It's like there's so many ways to play around with it. I do love that. Was it Toby who shared about like the manipulatives to move the parts and the pieces and the colors around? That's smart.
Yeah, I think that was very interesting too. So we're going to go through this just to show you one way of thinking about this. And you really can go through it backwards, exactly like Tracy was talking about, as well as go through it forwards, which I think is what it sounded like maybe Jaden's group did. And so one way to go through this is to, first of all, circle the matching parts and then underline the words that are different. So you look at each player and how they played it, and you look for what is in common for each of the scripts that they have and which ones are different. And so Sandra has a slide and she shows you what that would look like. And then from there, you could make a template or a script for playing the game. And so what do you think that would look like? And we kind of discussed that already with some of the different groups and what they came up with. So you could do a set of rules, you could do a board game. Is there anything else that anybody wants to add in how you would come up with a template or a script for this? All right, so then we have the next slide. We actually allowed you to do this both ways, just like we were talking about. Can you guess from the picture on this slide how the game went? If you're looking at the donkey, so I picked a donkey. And so what numbers were rolled to produce that picture? And you can just put it in the chat or you can unmute and tell us the 3 numbers rolled. All right, so Jaden was correct. I rolled a 1, and then I rolled a 6 and a 6, which put a red bow on the donkey's back. So that's one way to think about it. Then if you look to the right with the 3 dice I have, and I ask, what is the drawing? So if you rolled a 3 first, and then a 4, and then a 6, what would you be drawing for that roll? And you can put that in the chat or just say it as well. Correct. So I would be putting a yellow cupcake on the back of whatever animal I chose. And so those are 2 ways of thinking about this and then developing an algorithm from that. So let's go back to the computational thinking practices. So how do you think?
And hold on, I want to add just one thing. What may be surprising about this activity as Anne moves forward is what you want the kids to learn really has nothing to do with the game. And the game that they're playing is really not the point of the activity. And Anne will explain that with the next slide.
Yes. So how do you think youth would use the practices in the game with no instructions? And so go back to what you were doing in your group and how you were thinking through this. How are you using computational thinking practices? And obviously you're adults. So then how do you think your youth are going to use these computational practices in trying to figure out their game? And again, you can either type in the chat or you can unmute. All right, Kim said you can pattern match when you circle, decompose when you're looking at the steps, and then you make an abstract to start. And that's definitely one way you can think about that. So you're just really, when you are teaching this, you want to be thinking about how am I using these practices? She meant algorithm. Yeah, okay. And how are you thinking about these practices? And how are you going to teach those to the students? So we used actually all 4, or hopefully you used all 4 in this, because you broke your problem down into smaller pieces because you were trying to figure out this game. Then your pattern matching was the circling and underlining. Your abstraction was pulling out those things that were different so that you could make a solution that worked for everything. So you knew you had to roll the dice 3 times. You had to select an animal, and then you could draw it, put it on a game board. You could make the pieces like Toby talked about and match them, mix and match them. You could roll additional dice, however you did that part, but you needed the algorithm, which was a list of steps that you can follow to actually make your game work. And so that's how all of the practices were used in this activity. So we're going to wrap up this activity with a flash chat. These are the same questions that I might use to help youth reflect on and apply their experience after figuring out the game with no instructions. So I'm going to just ask you 2 questions, one at a time, and you can respond in the chat, or you can unmute and talk about your answer. You can share your own ideas, or you can comment on something somebody else has shared. The first question is, what strategies have you learned today that can help you when you have a problem that is too hard, and what can you do? And you can think about this in the context of your own lives, or you can think about it in the context of helping youth, either way. All right, several people down is definitely something they thought about. And looking for patterns. And somebody said, looking for similar problems. So if you've done something like this before, then figuring out how to extrapolate from that problem is definitely something that you can do as well. Or using their own experiences to draw from if they've had a similar experience with something that's similar to that problem. And I do agree with Sandra and a couple of the other people. These are ways to think about problem solving, and you can apply them in a broader context than just CS. But it's definitely something that they use in computer science. So the second question we have for you, if Sandra wants to advance the slide, is after this experience, what will you do first when asked to do something which you don't know how to do?
This one, I think, is a really good one to really think about that from the perspective of youth. Would they be able to answer this after going through this activity? What might they say? I know a lot of the people on the workshop today are 4-Hers, 4-H professionals. And we're really following the experiential learning model here that the game was the experience, and now we're helping them process that and generalize. Anybody have suggestions about how you could help them generalize this experience to make that connection that they can use these skills in other areas of life, not just in this game or activity?
Tracy has a good example. So going back to this question that we asked about the experiences, I think it's interesting that more than a couple of you mentioned the teamwork part of this or discussing it with somebody else. And, that hasn't come up yet in the other questions that we've been asking. That is definitely a part of brainstorming and solving problems, is getting together with somebody else. And I worked on a previous grant where we were doing wearable technologies, and we were working with some computer scientists for that. And they said, you always get together and help each other out, especially when you're coding. They said, you can't maybe figure it out, so you go talk it through with somebody else, and it helps you figure out what you're doing wrong. So that is definitely a part of computer science, and having that opportunity to share with others. So right now we want to take just a minute to do a poll that Sandra is going to open. And then after that, we're going to come back and watch a couple of videos about this activity being done with kids.
As I launched the poll, I was supposed to do this at the beginning. So we've used the term computational thinking a few times today, but what I'd like you to do is answer this as you would at the beginning of the workshop, whether you're familiar with this term or not, because that'll help us know more about how you reacted, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. Just a couple more people that haven't done the poll yet or submitted their responses.
I think the two people
Kinda-
that haven't done the poll are you and me. So I think everybody else is done.
Okay. So you can see we're kind of spread out, but for some of us, this is a new term. So that's what we were hoping for today, but it's good to know that most of our audience is at least somewhat familiar with it. So sorry, I forgot to do that at the beginning, but I do appreciate your input on that. All right, Anne, back to you.
All right, so now think for a moment about the following questions, but you don't need to type these in the chat. So what would you expect to happen if you led this activity with youth at your program? And what would they get out of it? Or what do you want them to get out of it? And would they think of themselves as computational thinkers by the end of this activity? When we do computer science in 4-H, it isn't just about the content, it's also an opportunity to support positive youth development. And computer science activities can help youth develop a sense of confidence and competence. And computational thinking builds problem solving and critical thinking, and it's a different way to think about problem solving. So now we're going to watch a video of youth actually doing the activity you just did. And think about, as you're watching this video, how Dagan facilitates this activity to support developing a STEM identity. In this case, seeing themselves as a computational thinker. You're muted, Sandra.
I'm going to take us to the Click to Science website to watch the video. Sorry, that was a mistake on my part.
Okay. The objective of the game without rules is to provide the youth an opportunity to intentionally take all 4 parts of computational thinking and apply them and get to that end goal so they can see it all together as a method. We start with decompose, so we break down the problem. And then we look at any types of patterns. Another step is abstraction. So that's taking out all of those differences and really taking a look at what might be able to be applied in different ways. And then finally, we're looking at creating algorithm. And so we're creating that algorithm, that list of steps to solve that problem. We started with an activity that was very challenging and nearly impossible in a very purposeful way. So are you ready for a really big challenge? Yeah. So you can't use paper and you can't use pencil for this challenge. You have to just use your brain, all right? Sum all of the numbers between 1 and 200 in your head. You have 30 seconds. Are you ready? Ready? All right. Think about it. Go. And so the point of doing that is to set up that things are challenging and we need tools in order to solve them. So after the kickoff activity to get them to start seeing this, we started getting into a game that had no rules, with no instructions. Sometimes when we are on the computer, we don't have instructions and we need to figure out what's going on. That's what we're doing. So the first part, the suggestion is to circle the sections of words that are identical from player to player. I facilitated kind of a back and forth between the students in order to get them to start seeing that they can break down the problem. Yeah, so first, let's see if we can find any patterns. So if we read that first sentence, take a look at that first sentence. I choose, yeah, I choose. Is there anything else here? What's the same in these two sentences? What can I circle just like on your activity?
I have 3 orange cats and I have two orange fish.
Awesome. So our next step is underline the words that change from player to player. So out of these sentences, what's different?
2 and 3, fish and cat.
Okay, 2 and 3, and fish and cat. And then third, on this bottom part, you're gonna write a script. What would a computer do in order to play this game? So they completed that game using computational thinking and all 4 areas. At the end of that lesson, they had to write that script, that algorithm, in order to have someone else play the game with them.
You have to choose an animal.
All right, first step, choose an animal. In my algorithm, that's what we go first, right? Choose an animal. Then what do I do?
And then you roll a dice to know what color.
Okay.
Roll a color, and then you roll again, and then you get a 6. You have to get, if you got a 2, you have to get a blue bow.
I'm gonna see if I can decompose. I'm gonna break it apart. There is a yellow cupcake on a tiger's tail. So that means a 2 was rolled, 4 was rolled, and a 3 was rolled. Am I right? Yeah. Yeah? Awesome. So I can tell, I can go backwards and forwards based on what you did. You guys are awesome. So at the end of the activity, they had the instructions that didn't exist before.
Now let's watch a second video. Actually, before we do that, so what did you notice in the video? And you can share your observations in the chat box, or you can unmute. And this can be anything.
Did anybody notice that when one of the girls was reading, she didn't seem to be at a reading level that you might expect for someone her age? These students were all English language learners, so they had a wide variety of familiarity with English within the classroom. So it was a very mixed group. Even though they were all about the same age, they couldn't all read and write in English at the same level.
All right, several people noticed that he kept using the terms. So he was reinforcing that vocabulary. And Dagan actually taught ELL for 10 years. So he was pretty experienced in knowing how to teach them vocabulary. And he also, you don't see on the video, put signs with those. So he put hand signs with each of those 4 vocabulary terms. And so that was definitely something. And then several other people noticed he modeled, or he asked questions instead of giving explanations. He was positive. Those are all really good observations. So now let's watch a second video that focuses on how Dagan facilitates the activity. So as you watch this video, notice the positive and negative emotions that youth are experiencing. And are they learning to manage their emotions? Notice how Dagan adapts the activity to support youth in seeing themselves as a computational thinker.
You're a computational thinker.
A computational thinker.
Awesome. To form STEM identity, the youth need to be able to form that opinion of themselves, and they need to internalize it. So how does that happen? So one is awareness. So knowing that these things are out there is definitely helps form identity as a kind of a passive, that thing exists, thus I could pursue it at some time. But to go beyond that, we also have to have some of that identity formed within the students. Once I became a partner with Jay here, I'm going to pick one of those words and I'm going to say decompose, break a problem into smaller pieces. I'm going to say a definition, and then Jay's going to choose one. So just choose any one of those four, and you're going to do it over and over and over. Okay, which one?
Algorithm.
And what's the definition?
Steps that you can follow to finish a task.
Boom. All right, so we've both said a definition. We're going to say, you are a computational thinker. Say it to me. And then I go find another partner. Right? So then I Today during this lesson, I happen to have the students orally say, I am, and then whatever that identity is around, and multiple times, in multiple ways, in multiple contexts. So with the success, I wanted them to say, I am the computational thinker. So what do I do first? I need to choose a animal. So this is that algorithm. Okay, so I'm going to choose a puppy. Right, what do I do next?
Roll again.
Oh, okay. And then I write it down. I'm figuring out the pattern here. Yeah.
And you gotta go again.
And again, okay.
Last one.
And
you got
a two.
Then you got one, so you're gonna put a cell
Thank you.
phone. Then,
A cell phone,
Then you
okay.
got a two again, so you're gonna put a cell phone, a blue cell phone in his tail.
On the horse's tail, was there an example? Okay, that's what the cell phone needs to look like. Blue cell phone on the puppy's tail. Yeah?
Yeah.
So you just gave me a set of instructions. Do you remember what that word's called? Algorithm. So you gave me an algorithm to solve this problem, right? To follow these instructions. You guys are great computational thinkers. Can you all look at each other and be like, I'm a computational thinker, right? Like you're fixing your hair? Yeah. So reinforcement of that helps them internalize that as a way for them to begin to solve problems.
Then a blank and then a blank.
Nailed it.
That means
Yeah.
I need to draw a blank on my blank thing.
You nailed it. You're a computer scientist. Even if they don't become a computer scientist, being able to be a multifaceted person, be able to have multiple skills, this would remain with them that they become a problem solver. It's a transferable skill, and having them feel that inside them by saying it, I think is super powerful.
So how does Dagan adapt the activity to support youth in seeing themselves as computational thinkers? And do you think he was successful in what he did? Again, you can either respond in the chat or you can unmute.
I'll just interject. One of the things I really liked was that he had the kids walk him through the process. And they got to be the teacher at that point. They were telling him, what they'd figured out, how to play the game versus it being, the other way around. So yeah, again, it's that facilitation. Answers are easy. Asking the right question is hard. And he does a really nice job with that of, having the kids think it through and explain it, and facilitates their learning by allowing them to be the one that is actually the teacher for a while.
I agree with that. And he does do a really good job of asking questions, and he's not just telling answers. And a couple of people, while Toby was talking, said repeating and confirmation, making sure that they know they're a computational thinker by repeating that. And he did that several times through the course of that day. And engaging the kids. You could see as you were watching the kids, they seemed to be interested. At least that's how I interpreted it when I have watched this video. And he reinforces the objectives by including the students, which is kind of what Toby was talking about as well. So I think those are all some ways that he has adapted the activity from what's actually in the lesson plan on code.org. So what did he add that wasn't part of the activity when you did it? So in thinking in your groups, what did he add that you all did not get? We just stuck you into groups of 3 and let you try to figure it out. Okay, repeating definitions with partners is definitely something he did. Adding verbal instructions, you notice he was a little more explicit in his instructions. Why don't we circle the words that are the same, underline the words that are different? We didn't really give you those instructions. We let you try to figure that out on your own. So what positive and negative emotions do you see in the video? And do you think the students are learning to manage those emotions in this activity? Because this can be frustrating. And, you know, they started out with the figuring, trying to sum the 1 to 200, which was designed to be frustrating. So how did you see the positive and the negative emotions throughout the video?
I'm just gonna verbally chime in here, I guess.
Sure.
Sorry, put on my video. I mean, I think the whole essence of doing STEM learning and facilitating it well is having kids sort of be in uncomfortable feelings for a little bit so that they can move from that place of sort of, you know, internal conflict or fear or whatever the word is, and can see themselves pulling up and out of that and getting it. So it's okay, I think, for kids to be scratching their heads or putting their face down, or, you know, even sharing verbally, I don't get it, this is too hard, or whatever it is, that it's okay to say, yeah, we're all going to make mistakes in the beginning trying to figure this out. This is hard. This is hard. So I feel like that's the facilitator's job, is to say it, name it, own it, maybe even model something that's been hard for you, so that the emotional connection to the sense of accomplishment over time is known. It's not an unspoken thing happening in the room. And I think, just as a sidebar, much more frequently happens for girls.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think that is a really good observation. And, you know, it's sometimes in formal education, we have to move so fast that you don't really get to allow students to struggle with this and persevere, because we just have to keep going. And so it's nice. I found in informal settings, it's been a little bit easier for me to be able to allow the students to struggle a little bit and to work through those feelings. So I think that's a really good observation. And somebody asked a little bit about the context of this class. This was actually a school that was a full multilingual school, Spanish and English. And they had students that had just come from maybe Mexico or South America, a Spanish-speaking country, that were brand new, that had only been there a week, all the way to students that had been born in the United States and were totally fluent in English. And this wasn't an ELL class, it was a regular 4th grade classroom. And they did part of their instruction in Spanish during the day, they did part of their instruction in English, and this was the actual science class that they were doing this in. So it's a little bit of a unique school in that way. So maybe that helps provide you some context for what they were doing. But they do put all the students together for the regular classes, and then they would have some interpreters, or you notice that the kids were sometimes helping each other as well. Those that spoke better English or could write better English could read for some of the students that didn't know as much.
I just add to that what you just said there, and also what was it Tracy said. I think what we can see clearly there is the fact that the kids, the group dynamics that was created there, the kids actually, felt comfortable and more or less not turned off. And as long as we know that the education and learning process is an ongoing one, it's good to always create, that level of comfort, for them to realize that, of course, they are not just left by themselves, but as a group, they can accomplish, they can achieve. Sometimes when it boils down to an individual having the problem to solve, him or herself, they sometimes felt as if they are not, competent. But when it is done as a group, and I know that sometimes it has to be an individual thing, but when you establish that group dynamics, it also reinforces, that level of interest. So going forward into another lesson, the kids are already motivated, they're motivated to actually be engaged in the learning process.
I think that is a good observation, John. And I will add to that, these kids had been together all year, but Dagan had never met him before he did this activity. He came in and he did this activity in one day, so they had never met him. And so he kind of had to establish that rapport pretty quickly, which is always the case at the beginning of any year that you start with students. But so the students were comfortable with each other, but he had to kind of figure out those dynamics as he was teaching the lesson. So I think those are all good observations. And the last question I have for you on the video is then, in thinking about all of the things that you have looked at in these videos and experiencing this yourself, how would you adapt the activity to meet the needs of the young people you work with? Obviously, you may not work with Spanish-speaking English ELL students. So how would you adapt this for the young people that you are working with specifically in your program? And again, you can feel free to unmute. The conversation is always interesting, or put it in the chat so that we get as many ideas as possible.
Not to be talking too much, but
no, that's fine.
I currently work with a group of life skill students, and it was not, I would say it was not a traditional group of 4-Hers that you would have worked with. So you have to tweak some things, and you have to think out of the box, to make it a fulfilling educational experience for them. And so some of the things that I've observed here is also very much applicable to what we have already been doing. But one of the key things they're talking about group and the whole group dynamics. If you look at each of those students in those life skill classes, each of them by themselves, and this is stereotype too, it's very stereotypic. Each of them by themselves, one would look at them as not going to be able to achieve certain things, not probably going to be able to set a goal and, and work towards accomplishing this goal. But then through projects, 4-H projects and so on that we are working on together, we were able to allow kids to realize that, there is, in order to accomplish some things, you really probably need that support system. You need to partner, you need to have that level of collaboration. And so, we teach them all of that, but we allow them to be involved in all the parts of it. So if it means seeking some donations and so on from the community to, allow that to implement that project, we are going to allow them to be a part of it. If it comes to the point where having received those donations and sponsorships, and we need to say thank you, we're going to let them be a part of, signing and writing those little thank you letters and cards and stuff like that. But at the end, everyone is able to look at the project, the success of the project, and they feel a sense of, belonging and, and ownership, and they feel satisfied, and everyone is glorified into the whole process. So yeah, that's already something that is applicable in, in my area, and this is a reinforcement. Thank you.
I think that that is an interesting way to look at it, because there's so many different ways to help kids feel that they belong. And it's not just about telling them yourself, but writing letters is a good way, and helping them to apply for money, or helping them to do a different project that is out of their comfort zone. can help them to have a sense of accomplishment as well. So I think that was really helpful. And some of the other comments in the chat, working with multi-age groups, letting the younger kids be helped by the older kids. There's just a lot of different ways to do this. And so the lesson plans on the code.org don't get into the specifics of obviously your group. So thinking about how this works for your group is, I think, really helpful to make it a better activity for everyone. And so positive youth development needs to be an important component of your thinking about computer science and computational thinking. And we want this to be more than just developing knowledge. We want to use these activities to help youth develop their full potential as thinkers, problem solvers, and innovators. And so those are the main activity that we were doing today. So I'm going to turn it over to Sandra, and she will finish up.
All right, thanks, Anne. You took us through that really well. So this is another way of thinking about those computational thinking practices that we started with at the beginning. This is from barefoot.org, another site for teaching computing. You'll notice on this model, they have they call it concepts rather than practices. And they have 6 of them instead of 4, but you can see those same practices that we were talking about today: decomposition, patterns, abstraction, algorithm, and they add logic and evaluation. But these are the practices that we're trying to teach in this lesson. And then there are specific approaches to how they can learn those practices. But this is the idea of having youth think of themselves as a computational thinker, and also being able to apply these practices outside of just the activity that you presented to them, and that they can use that approach to solve a new problem, that breaking a problem down or creating an algorithm or a rule or a system are things that can help them in other ways. So as we think about computational thinking specifically as a skill that we want youth to develop, why do you think it's important? Or do you think it's important that youth in your program develop computational thinking? What are some benefits that they're going to get from having these skills? Again, you can just chat with us, or if you'd rather share in the chat box and type it, that's okay too. But why do we do this? So I see some different ideas coming up in the chat about being able to face problems, to do complex thinking tasks and transfer them to new situations. And computational thinking in particular, I think, is really important because there are so many career pathways, so many jobs of the present and the future where you need to have these skills. We work with computers every day in so many different fields, in ag, in shopping, in marketing. we use computers throughout our communication processes. So if they don't have strong computational thinking skills, those are going to be challenging no matter what career path they follow. So I think it's really important to preparing youth for the future that they have some computer science and computational thinking skills. Otherwise, they're going to really struggle with what's going to be expected of them in the workplace. If they're not comfortable using a computer and solving problems with a computer, they're going to really struggle, whether they're farming or being a scientist or marketing or even being an artist. Those skills are going to come in handy. So I think that part of preparing young people for their future includes building these sorts of skills. And there were some themes coming up in the chat earlier about integrating computational thinking into other program areas. And I think that's a really important idea too. So how can we integrate computational thinking into other areas of the programming that we do so that students get that sense for how it's going to apply in all areas of their life? Kim mentioned horses and tack. You want to talk a little bit more about what you're thinking there, Kim?
I was just, because I've done this before, being part of the CS pathway, but we try to reach out to some of our traditional animal science 4-H groups. And one thing that we make comparison to is writing an algorithm. Is even when you tack up a horse, there could be some variables, but there's in a lot of ways, certain things have to go in, like the pad before they put the saddle on, but other things can be variable. So how would they write an algorithm to teach younger members? So we kind of, mix it up a little bit. And the same thing with the game. Sometimes we tailor it if we're studying, like going out for a walk, we might pick animals that they might see, like raccoons and things like that, and have them, adapt it. So kind of just trying to reach some of the audiences that might not sign up for computer science, kind of in a fun way by playing these games so they get those computational thinking skills.
Thank you. Lisa has a similar idea about sewing, quilting, knitting, those program areas. I'm going to have you all take a few minutes to just look through the chat and respond to each other. So a tip on doing that, if you pull on the corner of your chat box, you can make it larger. And so it's easier to see the comments, but I'd like you all to look through the chat and find a comment that somebody else has made. And if you just click on that person's name above their comment, you can send a message directly back to them. This is part of that. If we were in person, you'd have a chance to talk to each other and learn from each other. And that's hard to do when we're connecting in a virtual workshop. So we're going to take a little bit of effort to do that and look through what people have said and comment back to them individually. When you're typing personal messages, I can't see them back and forth. So how are we doing? Do we need more time, or give me a thumbs up if you're ready to move on? Looks like there's at least a few people that are ready to move on. If you're still typing, keep doing that. That's okay. I think it really is important to come away not just with the ideas that Ann and I are sharing today, but with the ideas from your colleagues too. So this was our agenda today to get a sense of what computational thinking means and how we can support computational thinking in youth, and hopefully to increase your confidence in facilitating strategies. And also with each of our workshops, we want to give you at least one concrete activity that you can take away from the workshop that you can do with kids. So you've got the full activity for the Game with No Rules from code.org. And if you have any questions about that, feel free to reach out to us. If you are thinking about trying that and want some more ideas or support about how to run it, there's even more resources on code.org about the activity. But we wanted that to be something that you could take and use right away. And the code.org has their own set of resources, but the rest of these resources came from our Click to Computer Science website, which is a new site where we're trying to gather together resources around teaching computer science in out of school time and making that something that is open to all young people. And I saw that a few times in the chat, that this is for all students and everyone needs these skills, not just a few kids, but it's for all students. And can you go ahead and stop